Hello. Okay, lovely. Great. So, um, yeah, we're talking about English LangLit paper 2. Um, it's paper 2 is it more fun? I don't know if it's more fun, but like so British. So my accent switches, guys. I'm not British. My accent just like is all over the place. Um, English LangLit paper 2 is like difficult and same, like difficult and simple at the same time. Simple in the sense that like it's you get to choose. You get to choose your the question, you get to choose what works you want to do, so you have all the choice in the world, but at the same time they don't make it easy for us. So but okay, that is not how I speak though. I don't say bottle of water. It's just a bottle of water, guys. It's just a bottle of water. Anyway, I did. Okay, yes, because I read it out. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. English LangLit paper 2. Okay, so we're going to talk about 5 general things. General reminders, outlining, text types, because I'm going to go over different conventions. So when I go over the different conventions, you also have to, not you also, this will also be helpful for literature paper 1. So I know I'm not a lit host, but like anything I say in the text types part will also be helpful if you do literature, because paper 1 is unseen literature texts. So when I go over prose, poetry, and drama are the ones I'm going through. When I go over that, that'll still be helpful for paper 1s, for literature, not for LangLit. Okay, and then for this themes and notes, which I don't have any slides for that section, I'm just going to be yapping. And then 5 is questions. But again, if you guys have any questions, just keep putting them in chat, and I will see it as I go along, because that's how I get distracted. Yes, lit representation, because I know I'm not a lit host, because technically I'm not qualified to be a lit host, but I figured I'd just, give a little bit of help to the lit kids, because you guys don't have a channel of your own. Okay, general reminders, duration. Everyone should know this by now, but both HL and SL students get 1 hour 45 minutes to write their paper 2s based on 1 out of 4 prompts. So you get 4 prompts and you get to pick one. Both SL and HL will get 5 minutes at the beginning of the exam to read their text. That's not text. I copied that from the last slide, sorry. That's supposed to be read their prompts without writing anything. So those 5 minutes, in my opinion, and I said this in paper 1 in the paper 1 session as well, those 5 minutes I think are really, really important, because you can use those 5 minutes really valuably, or you can waste those 5 minutes. And I think that 5 minutes can help direct you in the direction you're meant to go with the exam. But I will talk about how you can use those 5 minutes later on. Okay. Few reminders. Paper 2 is a compare and contrast essay. Are we allowed to talk about texts other people have learned about? I don't know what you mean by ask about the texts. If you mean like, I don't know what you mean by that question. You can ask about them. If you're talking about here, you can, yes, you can. Whether or not I'll be able to answer the questions for your texts is not gonna be like, I can't confirm that, because I did very niche texts when I did English LangLit, so I don't know if I'll be able to be of much help, but we can still discuss them, because other people will for sure be able to answer questions if you have them. I did The Crucible, the play, Doubt, the play, The Bloody Chamber and Other Short Stories. What else? Mouse, a graphic novel. What else? I was not kidding. I'm telling you, it's such niche. Sylvia Plath, which is probably. Oh, you mean you want me to ask it? Okay, fine. Everyone, if you want to put a list of all the texts you're doing in chat, go for it. So we can get some common ones you guys can discuss within yourselves as well. Yeah, so let me go through mine again. I did LangLit, so my texts are fewer, but I did Mouse, which is a graphic novel. I did The Bloody Chamber and Other Short Stories by Angela Carter. I did Sylvia Plath poetry. I did Doubt, which is a play by Arthur Miller, and The Crucible, which is a play by Arthur Miller, and Doubt, which is a play by John Stanley. His name is Stanley. I don't remember the rest of his name. Okay, let's see. Oh my god. Yeah, so I did so many niche ones, like that there is. Persepolis is a really common one. Doll's House is a really common one. What's her name? I'm forgetting the poet's name. Caroline Duffy is a common one. What else is? Yeah. But someone said, shouldn't we do just 2? So here's the thing, right? Yes, you are meant to do 2 in your paper 2s, but I would recommend that you go in with more than 2. You do not want to show up to paper 2 with only 2 texts, like, completely known, and then have to try to fit them to questions that do not fit. That is the worst position you can be in a paper 2. You do not want that to happen to you. So my personal recommendation would be you have at least 3. And more than that would be amazing. What do you mean your school made you do only 2? 4 questions for choose. Okay, so wait, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well. But the thing is, you only have 2 left. See, this is the thing. I don't like when schools do it like this, where they, where they do such specific number of texts that you can only fit your, you can only fit each of the requirements. So you can do 1 for your IO, 1 for your HLSA, and then 2 for your paper 2s. I don't like when they do it like that, because it literally, it constricts you so much. My advice is you should have at least 3 texts prepared, 3 of your texts prepared when you go to your paper 2 essays, because I think it's really, really hard for you to be restricted in in your paper 2s. It's if you have only 2 options in your paper, let me explain this in a better way. So for example, out of my texts, you did literature, so of course your teacher made you do more. Lang and Lit teachers are really, really Lang and Lit teachers are bad at this. I'm literally gonna say this. Can you use the same works for both questions or not? What do you mean? If you mean, can you use the same works for an IO and for a paper 2, then no, you're not meant to. Okay, let me explain it this way. So for example, out of mine, if I went into my English LangLit paper 2 with only Doubt and Crucible prepared, and out of the 4 prompts, there's so much what's happening. Anyway, yeah, out of the 4 prompts, if I have 2 texts prepared, it's very possible. Guys, let's not get off track, please. This is so much confused. Can we please focus on English LangLit? What was I saying? yeah, if I only have two texts prepared, and out of the four prompts I can't properly fit them in any of the prompts, I'm stuck. Which is why I say, please prepare three when you go in, because then you have the opportunity to mix and match. Because if you don't have the opportunity to mix and match, I feel that you can get very constricted. There you go. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, if your teacher is only giving you two, go with the two. That's your option. More than three, I wouldn't recommend more than three, because more than three means that you're preparing less efficiently for all of them. I would say a minimum of three. If you can do, you can do four. If you can do, you can do five. It's up to you. You just, as many as you can do in depth and actually be able to draw meaningful connections with, then it doesn't matter. Yeah, so I like what Banana said there. Like, you can know four really well, two you know really, really, like, amazingly well, and two you can have as your backup. Or you can say three. That's my thing. Anyway, okay. So, what was I talking about? Yeah, so if someone has, like, if your teacher has only taught you enough works where you only have two left for your paper two, then you damn well prepare those really well. Then you have no excuse as to like, oh my god, there's so many questions. Let me just it's compulsory for us to do three of Karen Allen Duffy. Yes, so things like that, you have to have three poems. If it's like short stories or poems, you have to have a minimum of three, because it has to be a body of work. It cannot be just one poem or one short story. Does that make sense? Yes, you have to learn three. That's what I just said. You have to do three. The examiners do know, well, they usually would know what you have done for your IO and HLSA. The goal is to not, like, you're not meant to repeat your bodies of work. Anyway, I'm just gonna keep going, because this is getting us nowhere. Anyway, also, if you're M26, a lot of this is just like advice. It's not applicable to, like, anyway. So paper 2 is a compare and contrast essay. That's what I was talking about. So I think a lot of times people forget that a paper 2 is, you're meant to compare and contrast. You're not meant to just do contrasting. You're not just meant to, like, spot the differences between the two works. The goal is to establish comparison and contrast. The goal is to establish things that the authors do similarly, and then things that they do differently to have a similar effect or different effects. That's your choice. Do we compare and contrast anything other than authorial choices? Yes, you can, and I will get to that in a bit. Potential prompt questions we can get in paper 2, anything. Literally anything. Also, guys, I would just say, if there's questions in the chat, please try not to answer them in the chat as well, because then the questions will get lost. If you have answers to the questions, just, like, put them in one text. Don't, like, repeatedly text. Anyway, what was I talking about? Yes. So, I talked about this in paper 1 as well, in the paper 1 session as well. I was talking about Peel, where this is a good format for paragraphs in general. Now, this it's both for paper ones and twos, for any essay you write at all. Peels are important because it's point, explanation, point, example, explanation, or and link. But I know there's other ones that you can use, which is fine. You can do things like that. But like the main point is that you need to have sufficient evidence and explanation to each point that you're making, and you need to link it back to your what's it called? Back to your thesis. Okay, next thing. Specific quotes aren't necessary to memorize. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one. People will say that you should memorize specific quotes, and while that may be, you can, but you don't have to. It's not a requirement from the IB. It's not something that you, one second. Anyway, okay. Yeah, so you need to be, oh my god. Cry. I'm actually gonna have a breakdown. Okay. Yeah. Specific quotes are not necessary to memorize. If you include them, definitely. If you have the ability to memorize quotes, you can do that. You can add it into your essays, and sure, it'll add something of value. But if you can't, if you don't feel like you can remember quotes, if you feel like trying to remember quotes will actually be worse for you than not remembering quotes, then it would be amazing if you just like remember descriptions of what you want to talk about. It has to be related to the devices that you're talking about or the theme that you're talking about, but it does not have to be very specific quotes. For example, if I was talking about a specific scene, I can just say, in the scene where, a really short blurb, and then say, like give a little bit of context, but you don't have to explain the whole scene. You don't have to describe the entire scene, but you can just say something as simple as, in the scene where this character does this, you can the author or the playwright or the creator uses this and this through this and this, and then you can just describe it. You do not have to talk about you do not have to have specific quotes. It's not necessary. It is not necessary. Anyway, next, make sure to provide adequate evidence for any point. Now, while I said that you don't have to have specific quotes, you do need to have specific evidence, and you need to show how it works in the work that you're discussing. So how the author does what you're saying he does, how it's demonstrated in the actual work, you still need to include examples. Regardless of the fact that it doesn't have to be a direct quote from the book, it doesn't have to be a direct quote from the book, the prose, the poetry, or whatever it is. It just has to be an adequate example. So you can just give a short description that this happens, or that very generally speaking, throughout the work, the author does this, and this. Okay? Good. Before I go into outlining, okay, can everyone stop replying to the pre-IB? Please. And to the pre-IB. If you have questions about the IB, go into IB Talk. If you have questions about MYP, go into pre-IB Talk. We have those channels specifically. This stage is not the place for you to talk about the IB. This stage is just for English Lang and Lit. So please let us have our session. No worries. If you have any questions, you can ping me in Gen Chat. You can ping me in other places, not in this chat. Okay. Okay, and I know someone said that quotes impress your examiner. It's recommended to have at least one. While this may be true from an outside perspective, examiners will not think less of you if you don't have a quote. If you can include a quote, it will help your case. It doesn't mean that if you don't include a quote, it's going to make your case worse. It just means that your case can get better if you have quotes in there. The link to the slides and the link to the recording will all be sent after the session is done. Sorry, I need to get the session done before I can start sending all the resources that I have. Okay. I know someone asked, has paper 1 already been covered? I've done paper 1 before. I would say paper 1 would be paper 1 was covered before. Paper 1 recording is in the M25 English Lang and Lit chat. If you want to go and check it out, you can. Definitely, if you can get, I will talk about this later, about quotes and stuff when I'm talking about themes and notes. But if you have the ability to be able to memorize quotes and actually use them properly in your essays, then go for it. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying you should make sure that it doesn't hinder you. Like, trying to remember quotes doesn't hinder you more than help you, if that makes sense. Okay. Also, I don't mean don't put anything in chat. I just mean try to keep things in topic just so it's easier for me to answer questions and concerns and things like that. Just try to keep it as less off topic as possible. Okay. Now we're going to talk about outlining. I already said this. The link to the slides and the link to the recording will be sent in the English LangLit chat after the session is done. Anyway, question for later. I will take a look in a second after I talk about outline. Okay, so I talked about outlines in paper 1, but the way I would do an outline in paper 1 is a little bit different to how I would do an outline in paper 2. Now, a few things. When you are given the prompts, not the text, I mean the prompts. When you're given the 4 prompts, you have 5 minutes to read through it. And although you're not allowed to write, you do have time to read through it. And even after this time has elapsed, or once the 5 minutes are over, you can still take another 5-10 minutes to read and understand and try to digest what you want to write about. And it doesn't, just because the reading time is over, doesn't mean you have to stop reading or start writing immediately. In my personal experience and in my opinion, immediately starting on the essay can sometimes be more troubling than taking your time and trying to plan it out and finding a way to make sure that you're actually make sure that you're actually sure about the question that you want to answer. Because a lot of times what will happen is, in the 5 minutes reading time, you read through the 4 prompts, you're like, okay, this prompt fits really well with my things. But then when you try to write an essay, you can sometimes get stuck and be like, oh, but I didn't think about being able to actually talk about multiple things. I didn't think about this. I didn't think about that. There's a lot of things that you can think about in the first 5 minutes of even your writing time, rather than trying to rush into writing the essay. Someone asked, how fast should we decide? There's no real metric. I would say you can take as long as you need, as little time as you need. It's a personal choice. You have to do this through trial and error. You need to see how much time you need to be able to answer certain questions, how much time you need to be able to outline, how much time you need to be able to do certain things. And that's very, very specific to each person. Yes, you are allowed to ask for an extra answer booklet. You're also allowed to just do it on the front page as well. Or you can do it, you can ask for scratch paper. It's a personal choice. Anyway, those mock questions, as far as I know, are past paper questions, so they're not gonna come in your next exam, FYI. I mean, you can still answer them. I just mean, like, don't be like incessantly answer them. You can answer them, just like make sure you're writing a full response so there's less back and forth where I can like find the questions easily. Anyway, yeah, so before you write an outline, as you read the question, I would say try to spot the keyword. Each prompt from the IB, so I'm going to use the ones Washcloth sent, for example. Each prompt in the IB will have one or two or a few keywords that they expect you to interpret and digest, essentially. So, for example, in the first question that he sent, he or she, sorry, sent, it's some literary texts, although set in a particular place or time, convey ideas that are universal. In what ways is this true in two of the works that you have studied? So, for example, in that case, there's place or time, set in a particular place of time, so place or time, and ideas / universal. So universal ideas. Those are the two things that they expect you to talk about. Now, from that question, you know that when they say set in a particular place or time, they expect you to talk about setting, and universal ideas can be anything. I forgot what I was saying. But yeah, so you do have to make sure that you can digest what the question is actually asking of you rather than just try to dive right in superficially, is what I'm saying. Anyway, this is what I would personally outline like. It doesn't have to be how you do it, but this is just what I think is good. The first part is mostly just for your intro, so obviously have written down your question. The interpretation should be the interpretation of the keywords that have been provided, and that's important for knowledge and understanding, which is criteria A, because you need to show that you have proper knowledge and understanding of the larger themes. And then obviously, even in the analysis and interpretation, you need to be able to show that you're able to extrapolate the keywords and the themes that the IB expects from you onto your the two texts that you are discussing. And then context is what are your two works and who are they written by and when were they written. That should be a max of one sentence per work. So something like Arthur Miller's The Crucible was a play written in dash about this, about blank, discussing the themes of blank. Okay? And then sub-themes are some sub-themes that connect to the main keyword in the question. So for example, the question about how and to what effect do two of the works that you have studied portray the societies that they are set in. Societies is a keyword there, so you want to try to find the sub-themes of the society. So something like the social, political, and economic state of the society in which it was set. That can be the three sub-themes that you talk about. And then devices is obviously just literary devices. Comparison. And then, so for body paragraphs, you want to, again, I've emphasized this before, I'm going to say it again because I feel like this is something that not everyone, but a lot of people miss. You have to have comparison and contrast. Now, whether you choose to do that comparison with comparison of themes and contrast of devices, or comparison of devices and contrast of themes, you can do it either way, but you have to do comparison and contrast. It cannot be only comparison or only contrast. You also want to link to specific devices. You also want to link back to your thesis statement. So your thesis statement should include the sub-themes that you're going to discuss and the devices through which it's done. Does everyone understand how to outline? Are there any questions specific to outline? I mean, you don't have to ask me. At this point, there's a lot of general notes being put down in this chat anyway, so you go for it at this rate. Are there any questions, is what I was going to ask. Any questions about what I've said? Any problems with what I've said, even? Could you plan the conclusion on the outline? You can. But I would say you don't have to. You can. That's a personal choice. You can plan a conclusion in the outline as well. You might not either, but like in terms of outlining is going to take as much time as you want it to take. So it doesn't matter. You don't need a counterclaim, no. Why would you need a counterclaim? It's not an argumentative essay. Okay, there's no, again, I've said this in the paper 1, there's no minimum or maximum of body paragraphs. The body paragraphs are different for everyone. The way you write and the way you structure your essay is very different for everyone. So you don't have to aim for a minimum of 4 body paragraphs. But I would say if you have anything less than that, I don't know if you're writing a sufficient essay in the time that you've been given, is how I'm going to say. Yes, I would say outline your thesis. The thing is, the first section where I said sub-themes and devices, those sub-themes and devices are what create your thesis. So you want to say both the author number 1 and author number 2 show themes of blank, blank, and blank through devices of blank, blank, and blank. And that's a pretty good thesis. Someone said signposting. That's what signposting is. Your thesis should have your signposting. Okay, if your teacher said that you don't need a conclusion, I'm not going to go against what they said, but personally, I would say if you don't have a conclusion, it can... Well, obviously, you want to focus on body. You don't want to spend your time... Well, the IB will never say something is mandatory. That's not how they work. But I'm just saying, obviously you want to focus on the body because that's the main part they're going to be grading. But you want to have a conclusion because if you don't have a conclusion, it takes away from structure and language. Link to thesis would be the conclusion, right? No, not necessarily. Each paragraph should have a link to the conclusion. Signposting, I meant stating what each paragraph will discuss. Well, yes, when you write a thesis, my expectation is that each of your paragraphs is going to discuss one of the sub-themes. That's what signposting is. Devices part, could you repeat it? What does it mean? It's the literary devices that each of your authors uses. So something, conventions of each things. Okay, then if you mean in each paragraph, I wouldn't call that signposting. I would call that topic sentences. Each of your paragraphs should have a topic sentences, and each of the end of your body paragraphs should have a link back to your thesis. Yeah, don't say now I will discuss. Just like make sure that your topic sentence includes the sub-theme that you're going to talk about and the devices that you're going to talk about. And that should be the first sentence of your essay. Anyway, is there a visible limit we should keep in regard to the context provided about the text? I would say if you feel like you're describing too much, you're describing too much. You just want to say the most, the most relevant bit. You don't want to describe the entire scene. You just want to talk about the specific part that you want to talk about. Do I have to compare and contrast in each body paragraph, or can I do that after talking about 2 points in 2 different works? Oh my god. Sorry. No, it's okay. I was saying oh my god to other things. Don't worry, you're fine. I would personally say that you should compare and contrast for each, not each paragraph necessarily, because it depends how you do your paragraphing, but for each point that you're trying to make, you have to have a compare point and a contrast point. So each compare point should come with a contrast point, is how I'm going to put this. Okay. We've talked about general tips, and now I'm talking about outlining. That's all we've done. It is recorded and it will be put up, and the slides will be put up. I'm not going to comment on what people's specific teachers think, because that's different for everyone, and specific examiners are also different. So like it's hard for me to be like, no, you're wrong, because each examiner thinks and does it differently. Let me put it this way. You shouldn't assume that they know everything, but you also shouldn't assume that they don't know anything at all. Your description should be that anyone who would read the essay will be able to understand it, regardless of whether or not they are an English examiner. You need to give context that is specific to the points that you are making. The context doesn't have to be the plot of the entire thing that you're talking about. You don't have to explain what everything the poem's about. You don't have to explain the entire plot of a book. You don't have to explain the entire plot of a like short story or something like that. I would say the only context you need to give is the context that is relevant to the points that you are trying to make. You don't want to give context of the entire plot. I'm just going to put it like that. Okay. I'm going to drink some water. Give me a second. I need to breathe. Okay, guys. I know everyone's teacher used to be an IB examiner, because that's very common, but everyone's teachers say different things for different, like, because each examiner also has different experience. I'm just gonna say, don't think they're dumb, but also you shouldn't have to explain. She used to be an examiner before she got pregnant. Okay, enough of those jokes. Anyway, again, I've said this. Okay, I'm just gonna restate what I already said before, but in a more simple way. All the context you give in your paper 2 essays should be enough to make your point, and not not too much where all you're doing is describing the plot. It's as simple as that. For each point that you make, you need to explain how it's shown in the work, but you don't need to explain the plot of the work to do that. Okay. Now we're going to talk about text types. This is helpful just in general. I'm going to talk about some general conventions of the different literature text types. This is helpful for lit paper 1 as well, not just paper 2 for LangLit and literature. Yeah, so when you said put one sentence of the plot to make some sense, yeah, so that's what I meant by context here. When I say context here, the context is one line context of both the works. So you say Arthur Miller in, for example, Arthur Miller's Crucible is a 19 something something play about blank. Doubt by John Stanley or whatever his name is a something something, is a year and play about blank. So that's enough context in terms of introductions. But then sometimes if you don't have quotes, then when you're providing context as an example in your analysis, in your body, then I would keep it as much as necessary, is all I'm going to say. Unnecessary in your opinion, this is just my opinion. Anything I say, everyone should know this by now, but anything I say now or in my paper 1 sessions or anytime as a host is all my personal opinion and how I would do it, how I did it actually. Whether you disagree or whether you have better ways, I'm not going to argue with. You probably do. It's a personal choice. Someone asked about Revision Village. I did not use Revision Village at all, so I can't say whether or not it's useful. Course Hero, haven't used that either. Can't say. Anyway, we're going to talk about text types. So first is prose. Prose is any written work that follows a basic grammatical structure with words and phrases arranged into continuous lines. Now, this is a definition from like a host like 4 years ago. I don't know. Not my definition, but it's a fair definition, I would say. But the main point that you need to know is it follows conventions of setting, plot, and characterization. Now, setting, plot, and characterization are really important for prose. And now this prose can be either graphic novels, short stories, novels, novellas, etc., etc. Setting, plot, and characterizations are important conventions for any prose. And these are supplemented by punctuation, or structure, and literary devices to convey the message. So there's conventions and devices. Now the conventions are setting, plot, and characterization, and then each of those have certain literary devices that help build the prose, if that's a good enough explanation. Okay. Setting. First, where and when, if relevant, does your text take place? So, where does the story take place in your text? Where is that setting situated? When is that setting situated? Etc., etc. But you want to go from small to big. So, if you're talking about a specific scene, so, sorry, I'm going to bring up like Doubt or Crucible a lot because those are the ones that are at the top of my head currently. In Doubt, you have for example, in Doubt, one of the scenes was in a principal's office. Now, that principal's office is in a Catholic school. That Catholic school is in the city of blank. And that city, it's that city in that year. And then go like that. So you're going to go from where the scene takes place and then expand into the wider context of the setting. That's what setting is, period. How is setting portrayed? So you're going to talk about what are the devices and features that are used to construct setting in your works. Is it visual, auditory, imagery, narrative perspectives, things like specific literary devices, specific like descriptive language, again, imagery, like I already said, things like that. Still is like all of those are how a certain convention is portrayed. So things like that are important to talk about when you're talking about setting at any point. You don't just want to say this work is set in 1980s France, for example. Sorry, this is just random, but like you don't want to just say it's set in 1980s France. You say it's set in 1980s France to portray this. The author talks about specific things, or like things like that. Or like this work is this scene happens in a courtroom, for example, and this is shown through auditory language with silent or less low volume, I don't know how to phrase this properly, but like light imagery or light auditory imagery, light auditory language. That's the word. Light auditory language, and things like that. So you can say you want to talk about the specific things that help portray the setting and not just what the setting is and why that's important. And then third is how the ADH's A Doll's House. How does that influence its effect on the reader? This is something you want to remember for any English paper. You always want to connect back to the reader and how it affects the reader directly, especially in paper 2, where essentially the main guiding force of your entire essay is the relationship between the audience, the characters, and the author. But yeah, so you want to talk about what are the connotations of that setting. How is the setting relating to the themes, the symbols, the motifs of that text? So again, I'm bringing up The Crucible. It was set in Salem during the Salem witch trials. That is connoted with a very dark time. That is also connoted with mass hysteria, and that relates back to the theme of cultural societies, where in a Puritan society, things like mass hysteria are really common. It was seen in the Salem witch trials time, and Arthur Miller portrays this in his work to highlight the similar functions in the real world. Something like that. That's a lot of waffle, but like you want to try to explain how that's directly affecting the reader. You don't want to just say that a setting exists, or you don't want to say, yeah, it was based in this setting, and this is, yeah. So you want to talk about how what it is, what it means, how it's shown, and how that affects the reader. Those are the 4 things I would say. Okay, before I go into plot, are there any questions about conventions of setting? The convention of setting in general, or anything else? Because there's not a lot of questions. Everyone just went quiet. B is writing something, so I'm gonna wait for a minute. Is this relevant for like if the question was about setting, or is it just to include essays in general? So definitely relevant. Sorry, you said question for later, so I will answer it later. um, anyway, it's relevant to, obviously, if the question was just about setting, but it's also something, if you're talking about prose, you want to talk about setting at some point. Like, you want to talk about the genre specific conventions, and setting is a prose specific convention, so you do want to talk about it, even though the examples I gave were plays, but you want to ignore that for a bit, sorry. But yeah, that's a general thing. Anyway, link these aspects of setting and prose to the question regardless, as it's good to include for the prose text type. Kind of, as long as it's relevant. I wouldn't say don't include it if it's completely irrelevant, but if the question was, like I said the question before, how and to what effect do authors in two works that you've studied portray the societies that they're set in, things like that. When you're talking about the societies, you do want to talk about setting, because obviously it's part of the question. As long as it's relevant, I would link aspects of setting, because that's, yeah. Okay, plot. Now, this is prose specific. It's called the Freytag's Pyramid, which I didn't know until I was doing research for this. Oh, someone asked another question. I'm going to wait. Do you think part of explaining setting is outlining the relationships between the characters that you're going to talk about? Yes, and yes and no. Yes. Like, Bloody Chamber and Persepolis are both forms of prose, yes. In terms of large settings, yes, they're both prose. There's prose graphic and prose textual. Persepolis is a prose graphic, and Bloody Chamber is prose textual. And yes, you include historical context into setting where you can and where it's relevant. Part of explaining setting is outlining the relationships between the characters, you asked. Yes and no. It's interlinked with both setting and characterization, I would say. Also, in general, I think the way I, like, in general, it's like a connection let me put this properly. The plot is the connection between the setting and the characterization. There you go. I talked about general reminders for the paper too. I've talked about outlining, and now I'm talking about text-specific conventions. There you go. Yeah, so this is Freytag's Pyramid. I didn't know it was called that until I was doing research for this slides, but we just called it, what's it called? The plot graph or whatever. But plots of fiction conventionally follow this pyramid, quote-unquote pyramid. I would just call it a graph, but you know. So there's the exposition, which is essentially the setup. So that's where you're being introduced to the characters, you're being introduced to the setting, you're being introduced to everything that's normal in this fictional world. Next is the inciting incident. Something happens, some kind of major issue comes about, some kind of drastic change essentially comes about that starts a rising action. Now, the rising action is the build-up, essentially. That's where a lot of the action... Well, that's a funny thing. A lot of the action happens. A lot of the preparation for the climax happens. So things get built up. You see things happening that you might think are not directly related, but then all of it comes together at the climax. Everyone knows what the climax is. It's everyone's favorite part of any movie, any show, any book, anything. The climax is essentially where it all goes down. That's where, well, literally and figuratively in terms of this pyramid, but the climax is where everything happens. Everything either goes wrong, everything is set right. Well, everything goes wrong more often than not, but that's where everything happens. And then the falling action is all the consequences of the climax, everything trying to fix itself, things going back to how they were, kind of thing. And then resolution. One thing to remember is at the resolution, you will not reach the same point as the exposition, obviously, because that's not how life works, which is why this pyramid is also drawn like that. Resolution, you're always in a different point as from where you were at the exposition, because the world is never the same after the climax, essentially. Yes, we are going to do a paper 2 mock. I don't know when yet. I will try to schedule one. My feedback on those will be a lot more, a lot less specific to your works, but I will give you feedback for it. So yes, I am doing a paper 2 mock, sorry, but not just yet. I also, anyone who did a paper 1 mock, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to mark all of them yet. It's been a hectic week. I will get them to you as soon as possible. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so that's plot. Anyway. Characterization. Okay, before I go into characterization, does everyone understand plot? You should all know this already, by the way. Anything that I say today, you should know already. I'm just repeating for emphasis. Okay. Are we good? Yes. As long as there's no... Okay. Someone's typing. I'm gonna wait. People are typing. Okay. Characterization. Okay, so there's 2 types of characterization. There's direct characterization and there's indirect characterization. So direct characterization is very specific character traits. So things like physical appearance, so their features, their clothing, their personality type thing. Actions, behavior and actions, their personality. And then speech is what, how, and to whom. So things like how do they talk, and when they're talking to specific people, does their speech change? Is there a specific language? Do they use specific language? Do they are the mannerisms different? Things like that. That's direct characterization. Indirect characterization is either their own thoughts or reactions of others with them. So these things are more indirect because they're more subtle. It's not directly, oh, this person is dressed like this, has this hair, has these glasses, has this type of face structure. You're not describing the actual character. You're inferring what they are like as a inherent character from their interactions. So usually if it's in the first person point of view, you'll get from their thoughts. If it's in a third person point of view, you might still get some thoughts, because a lot of times in third person point of view prose, you will still get some internal monologue. In terms of reactions, so if it's a lot of times when it's in the third person, it will say how they react to others and how others react to them, so you can see how the characters are framed. Even if it's in the first person point of view, you can infer certain reactions. Like the character will usually describe what the person looked like when they looked at them, what they said, how they said it, how they interacted with them, and things like that. So those are all indirect characterizations. Okay, is there anything? Yes, there is. Okay, does everyone understand direct and indirect characterization before I move on? Because characterization is a big thing. Are there any questions? Include lighting in this. Yes and no. I mean, I would put lighting is more of a play specific, like drama specific device, rather than in prose. But yes, Could I restate it? Yes. So direct characterization is very specific, specific descriptions of the character. So things like, what are they wearing? What do they look like? What are they saying? Like specific things said about them. Indirect characterization is things that you infer from interactions of the character with other characters, or thoughts from the characters, thoughts of the characters of other characters. It's all subtext, basically. Anyone who has to leave can leave, by the way. I usually, again, like I said, I yap a lot, so my sessions are like long anyway. But yeah. Does that make sense, B? How long will the session last? Another half hour or so, probably. I want to say. Ish. Shouldn't be more than that, hopefully. Okay. Characters can be static or dynamic. Now, there's static characters that don't change at all throughout the work, reflect certain ideas or stereotypes, and they don't change at all. And there's dynamic, which are transformative. They shape the contextual environment. They change throughout the plot structure. They go through some of the character development that we love in like prose. The thing is, static and dynamic characters are both important in terms of prose and storytelling. A static I don't know what you mean by that, but I'm gonna talk about static and dynamic before I talk about that. Okay, static characters are usually side characters. They're less likely to be the main character. Obviously, since the main characters in most prose are the ones going through the entire plot, they're the ones the action's happening to. They're probably the most involved in climax and things like that. The static characters are what shape they usually represent a specific idea or represent a specific stereotype, as it says on the slide. But they'll usually be really like set in their ways. They will be in like one specific mindset and not waver. And the relationship between the static and dynamic characters is what creates the plot line, essentially, because the dynamic character will get shaped by different static characters throughout their quote-unquote journey, if that makes sense. Okay, and then there's character foils. Character foils are characters that contrast each other to highlight the qualities of both characters. Character foils are very, very common. They're basically, you can either call them character foils or you can call them mirrored characters or doubled characters. They're basically, characters is not a word anymore, by the way. Character foils are when, like, for example, this is a very simple example. For example, if there's a principal and a pastor, and they're two characters, them together can be foil characters, where the principal is a measure of authority. If they're shown to be behind a desk more often, have more, authority in general. A pastor is not behind a desk, but is on an altar or is behind a podium. A pastor is also more interactive. A pastor is more personable in general. Now, those two characters are foils of each other because they are pretty much directly contrasted but also compared. Both have a authority of some kind. both speak from behind a platform. So for principals behind the desk, for a pastor behind in the altar or behind a podium, but they both represent distinctly two different things. A principal represents education, a pastor would represent religion, things like that. So those can be a character foil. What do you call characters that represent real life figures or parties to convey their ideologies? Like how a character is called a mouthpiece when they represent views of the author. I would still call it a mouthpiece. I don't know if I could be, like, I don't remember the exact term for it, but I think it's the same thing. It's the mouthpiece for that specific, not genre, but that specific ideology. I can try to find... Oh, proxy is a good one. A proxy character is that's a good word to use. I'm not sure if that's the exact word to use, but that is a good word to use. They act as a proxy to real life ideologies in the context of prose or play or something like that. I like that word. But yeah, so character foils oftentimes show commentary on society as a whole, because they will show the contrast of how these characters or the ideologies that these characters represent interact in the real world. So oftentimes, for example, it will be something like I said, for example, if it's a principal and a pastor, they're showing the tension between education and religion, for example. Do you have ways in which we can go about technique-based questions? I will talk about that later when I'm not talking about specific conventions. We're going over conventions of prose currently. Are there any other questions? Because I think people are writing questions. I'm going to wait for a second. Yep. I think that's good. I think that's a good explanation of how a proxy works, B. I think that's, yeah. Okay. Okay, now we're going to talk about graphic novels, essentially, or graphic analysis of graphic prose. So it's usually graphic novels in this case. But yeah. Things that you should talk about, or conventions that you should talk about in general. Gutter/panel transitions. That's really, 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 really important. I think that is probably one of the most valuable things that I will talk about today. Gutter and panel transitions convey a lot of information to, like, have a lot of meaning, even though it doesn't seem like they do. So things you want to consider when you're talking about gutter/panel transitions. What are the types of transitions? So there's different types of transitions. There's moment-to-moment transitions, there's action-to-action transitions, there's scene-to-scene transitions. There's a lot more, but those are the three main ones. Which one is it? And how does this impact the amount of closure needed for the audience? So for example, if it's a scene-to-scene transition, and for example, if there was a really, really, a really intense scene going on, and then it directly transitions into something that's completely unrelated and is not nearly as intense, how does that affect the audience? Which it would, right? Because you've just come from a really, really intense situation. You don't know what's about to happen, and then it transitions straight into another scene with completely different characters that you probably don't care about at this point, but it just transitions. So that effect on the audience you want to talk about. So you want to talk about how the transitions directly affect the audience. because the type of transition that the author uses, or the paneling or the gutters that the author uses, can really change how they are doing their storytelling. Next is color. What colors are used? What colors are used the most? What colors are used the least? What do the colors represent? If there are no colors, why have they put it? Why is it black and white? Is it monotonous? Is it monochrome? Is it monochromatic? Do they invoke specific emotions? Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there for now. I'm gonna talk about the next things. Okay. Scale, size, and graphic weight. So I haven't talked about narrative style yet. No, I haven't. Okay. Yeah, scale, size, and graphic weight. Now, all of these are quite interlinked in the sense that, well, scale and size are pretty much very similar, and graphic weight has a similar effect. So, when you have something that's really big, or something that is uncharacteristically big, or something that's uncharacteristically small, something that is scaled up for viewing, something that is really, really dark, or something that is really, really light in dark panels, those are features that a graphic novelist or an author would use to emphasize or exaggerate certain things. Or to underproportion some things. And then how does this create tension? Graphic weight, I could talk about for hours and hours and hours, but there's the fact that there is graphic weight or there is negative space being used can really change how the author portrays what they are trying to portray. You want to talk about the tension between the graphic weight and the the graphic weight that is there, and then the negative space. You want to talk about what does, for example, scaling up, what does scaling up do for the specific, let's not be rude, they weren't here, they just asked, and I answered them. No, I haven't covered narrative style, let's not be rude. Anyway, what was I gonna say? Yeah, what does it reveal about the things being emphasized? So when they have scaled up, for example, if they've scaled up something, then what does it specifically reveal? Like, what are they trying to highlight in that, and why is that important? Yeah, and then perspective. So perspective is really important. In what direction, in what position are people placed? In what perspective is the author trying to show things? What's in the foreground? What's in the background? Is the frame facing head on to the characters? Is it behind the characters? What way are the characters facing? What does it say about the status of a particular person? So, for example, sometimes there will be certain characters that are not facing the frame at all, and it can be a representation of they're hiding something. There's a big secret that they're hiding. There's something that they don't want to say, things like that. Yeah. So, for example, if someone's done mouse, Artie oftentimes is not facing the frame. He's either facing away from the frame, facing away from his dad, because there's things he's uncomfortable talking about. Things like that. Okay, font. This is still important. Obviously, even though it's graphic novels are a visual heavy, text type, you still want to talk about language, but I'm not talking about that right now. Don't forget to talk about language, even though it's a graphic novel, is what I meant to say. Anyway, font. So, does the style invoke a certain emotion or atmosphere? Does it increase comprehension or legibility? Along with font, I also want to say speech bubbles. how are the speech bubbles portrayed, what shape are the speech bubbles, what does it say, what does it say about the tone, what does it say, even fonts, what does it say about the tone, what does it, yeah, things like that. And then next is speech and sound. So who is speaking? Is it narration or monologue, dialogue? Is there onomatopoeia? So sometimes there will be like, for example, bang or other things. I don't even remember what the onomatopoeia can be in this situation. Sorry, my mind is blanking. But like, or like boom or something like that. Like what does that show? Is the narration happening from a specific person? Is it from a specific point of view? How does that change how it's being interpreted by the audience? Things like that. Is there, now this is more, what's it called? More meta in a way, but is the narration reliable? Is the narrator a fallible narrator? Is the narrator a unreliable narrator? Things like that. Emanata is different. Emanata is when you're like in terms of facial expressions and things like that, or like tears or shaking or things like that. That's emanata. Onomatopoeia is like bang, boom, ouch, things like that. Like exclamations of sounds is onomatopoeia. Emanata is still relevant, but it's more like visual things. Emanata is like shivering, shaking, running, wind, things like that. That's all emanata. It's like, yeah, sweat drop, for example. You can feel that they're nervous, things like that. Ouch can be onomatopoeia. It can be. Depends. It depends how it's portrayed. It can still be an onomatopoeia. Like if it's in like the same way bang is put in like a text, it can still be an onomatopoeia. Although yes, it is more of a word. It'll likely be more of an exclamation than an onomatopoeia in general, but it can be. Okay, now we're going to talk about poetry. Before we go into poetry, are there questions about graphic novels? Are there any issues with specific texts? Well, not that I can answer anything specific to Persepolis or otherwise, but like if there's anything where you're like, oh, but what does this mean? I can help. Yeah. How would you introduce the idea that the narrator is unreliable in the essay? Do you just state it? If it's relevant, again, yes. You can just state it. You can say the fact that he is an unreliable narrator is important because blank. Like, it has to be... I'm trying to think. Like, for example, in Mouse, the fact that Artie is technically an unreliable narrator because his dad's dead and he's telling the story in the perspective of himself and his interactions with his dad, but everything he's writing down is like different. He lies multiple times. That all shows that he's an unreliable narrator, and this is important because something. Like, as long as you can explain that why you think he's an unreliable narrator and why that's important, then yes, you can just state it. Can panel size be a relevant authorial choice? 100%. Panel size is a big thing. I realized I didn't add that in the thing, but panel size is 100% thing. Panel size and paneling in general. Because sometimes people will, authors will do Dutch panels. They will do, what's it called? Like Dutch angle panels, or they'll do splash panels, or they'll do open panels. Dutch panels are basically, like tilted panels, things that are not like in the normal square, what's it called, normal, like, you know what a normal cartoon page looks like, as long as it's, when it's like slided, when it's not specific squares, when it's like slanted squares and things like that. Dutch angles are usually used to disorient the reader. They're used to show a different perspective, things like that. That's what a Dutch panel / Dutch angle does. But yes, I would say panel size is definitely relevant. You should talk about panel size. Anytime you're talking about a graphic novel, things that should come up, usually, in my opinion, is definitely gutters and transitions, panels, and positioning slash and graphic weight. Those are three things I think that are must. But again, personal opinion. That does not mean that you have to have them in your essay. That's just something that I would definitely include if I was writing a paper 2 essay with a what's it called? Graphic novel. Are lengths of chapters relevant authorial choices? Yes, can be. Don't talk about number of pages, just talk about length. Specific shorter chapters can be necessary for certain things. You don't have to say like it was this many pages long. Just be like the author kept it small, kept it long. It's very specific to it's an authorial choice because it's different, because it's important, because things like that. You don't have to say it was exactly 15 pages long. You can just say like it's longer than the rest of their rest of the chapters of their like book and things like that. Anyway, is there anything else? Sorry, I realized I was not breathing in that entire time. Clearly, I love yap. Okay, poetry. Poetry are texts with deliberate patterns that usually form a formal metrical structure and contain line breaks. Poetry analysis requires understanding of narrative and how it's conveyed stylistically and structurally through the poem. Poems are primarily centered around rhythm, meter, and rhyming. These three things are probably the most important things in poetry in terms of conventions, because that's what they're centered around. I'm not talking about devices, it's just conventions. So there's many poetry devices. There's like millions, like not millions, but like hundreds. There's so many. I'm just talking about the conventions currently. So before I go on, rhythm is the way the poetry flows when read. So things like what's like the intonation when you're reading it, what's happening. Meter is the stressing of specific syllables, how many syllables is in each line. And then rhyming is the rhyme scheme, which not all poems might have one, but a lot of them do. Yes, do talk about types of speech bubble. I did say that when I was talking about the thing. How can we describe the rhythm? I'm going to talk about it now. So pacing dictates a lot about the effect on the reader. So rhythm is basically how the poem is paced. So for example, let me pull up a old poem. Let me see. Poem. Should I do Carol Ann Duffy? I have not read a single Carol Ann Duffy poem. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Give me a Carol Ann Duffy poem, guys. Medusa. Okay. I'm just gonna take your first one. Okay, that's Medusa for anyone who doesn't know. So, a suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy grew in my mind, which turned the hairs on my head to filthy snakes, as though my thoughts hissed and spat on my scalp. That's the first stanza. Sorry, I forgot the poetry-specific terminology. Stanza. So that's the first stanza, right? Now, the rhythm in that is very quote-unquote conflicting. She alternates between long lines and short lines and long lines and short lines and long lines. And the syllables in each of them are different. So that's pacing. Pacing dictates a lot about the effect on the reader, because the way the reader reads the poem will change based on how the author structures of rhythm in their poems. because a lot of poets will... No, I'm not going to say it like that. Basically, for example, in this poem, she intentionally slows the reader down by changing the rhythm between each line. So it goes, a suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy grew in my mind, right? And then you would expect it to follow the same number of syllables. Instead of that, it goes, which turned the hairs on my head, 250 snakes. That's a long, long line in comparison to the other ones. So the first sentence, for example, a suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy. Like, the way you say that is going to be very, like, punchy. It's going to be 1, 2, like, it's like 3 things, and she's saying them one after another. It's a list. It's a tricolon. But it's also just like a list of things, right? But then the line after that one is like a sentence. It's, which turned the hair on my head to 50 snakes. That's like a description. That's a sentence. That's changing the rhythm of the poem, and that's gonna change how the reader reads certain things or understands the meaning of certain things. So, contrast and sentence length emphasizes specific lines while also reflecting tone shifts. So, again, by saying a suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy, that's like a punchy, like, beginning of a stanza, for example. That is like the reader is automatically like, okay, I'm in. And then she switches that almost immediately with the longer sentence, and that's more relevant to the next thing, where it's pauses and pacing. So obviously she's drawing emphasis to specific ideas and specific lines. So the idea of turning the persona's hair into snakes is an idea she obviously wants to emphasize. So she's lengthening the pace in that line to make sure that the reader's like reading it properly, if that makes sense. Things like that. Smoothness / length of the lines may reflect the poem's subject matter and invoke feelings. So obviously again, I'm only analyzing the first stanza. I'm not gonna sit here and read the whole poem. But like, for example, the alternating lengths of the line, there's no actual smoothness in reading it. You would expect it to follow the same rhythm, but it's not following the same rhythm. So the reader's kind of disoriented, is feeling the same way, is feeling a certain type of way, like, is probably disoriented, is probably like, oh, what is this? Why is it not following the same metric? Because one thing that you should know by now is, like, humans in general love patterns. So the idea that the rhythm is not following a specific pattern is quite disorienting to general readers. So you might want to mention that it affects with, and then that feeling is also important. I have not even read this poem, but my like interpretation would be something like, she wants the reader to feel the same discomfort that the character is feeling in the poem, as her hair turns into snakes, for example. That's very superficial, but you know what I mean. Yeah, so rhythm is often, if you can't spot why the rhythm's like a specific way, I would recommend reading it out loud in your head, because you will very often understand what is the change in rhythm, or what is the rhythm specifically. Does everyone understand what I mean there? I mean, does everyone understand rhythm is my question. Also, for anyone who's done this poem, did my interpretation make any sense at all? Yes? No? Yes? Good? We're good? Okay. We're gonna talk about rhyme scheme. Now, again, rhyme is when two words at the end of the line sound similar, obviously, general rhymes. There's two main types of rhyme schemes. There's regular rhymes and irregular rhymes. And they convey different things about the subject matter of the poem. A regular rhyme scheme will follow a specific pattern. So for example, A B A B A B A B, things like that. So for example, if it was, let me see. Let me whip out a poem that I've written probably at some point in my life. Hold on. I'm trying to find. Oh, there's one in the thing, so I don't even have to find something. Okay, Own and Stone. Where is it? I'm so blind. Oh, okay, yeah. So perfect man, Greek god, my own. But I know you'll go betray me stray from home. So better buy for me if you were stone. So own and stone and kind of home. That is technically an irregular rhyme, but that's rhymes. That's what rhymes are. A regular rhyme scheme would be something like A, B, A, B, where each alternating line is rhyming. So, like Dr. Seuss is a good example of regular rhyme scheme. Dr. Seuss poems are all following an A, B, A, B, A, B rhyme scheme usually. Irregular rhyme schemes will create a less smooth flow. It creates more abrupt flow. You expect it to be like kind of uniform and be like, okay, it's gonna alternate and gonna rhyme now, and then it doesn't do that, and then you're like, but wait, why didn't it? Type of situations. So when there's an irregular rhyme scheme, again, more of the poems that we do in IB are irregular rhyme schemes, I feel, than regular rhyme schemes in general. But again, that's just a general comment that might not be factually accurate, but the point of an irregular rhyme scheme would be similar to the point of an irregular rhythm, where it's trying to bring emphasis to certain things and making the reader kind of not uncomfortable. Well, uncomfortable is a good enough word, I guess. Trying to make the reader less comfortable with how the poem's flowing, because you would expect it to flow in a certain way and then it doesn't do that, and you're like the reader's mind goes, but why? Again, you don't need to memorize lots of specific rhyme schemes of poem types, though the ability to identify if the poem is of a specific common type is a useful skill. That's more geared towards paper 1 for literature students. That's like poetry can come as one of the unseen extracts is that what, yes, extracts in your paper 1s. So that specific thing is more for you than for anyone who's thinking about poetry for paper 2. If anyone's thinking about poetry for paper 2, make sure you have at least 3 poems ready to discuss, because you need to have a body of work. You cannot discuss just one poem from the author and call it a day. Not the author, sorry, the poet, and call it a day. Anyway, yeah, so rhyming draws attention to the words that rhyme. So usually it'll be emphasized. The rhyme scheme will usually emphasize certain words and certain meanings of those words. There we go. Okay, now we're gonna talk about meter. So, is this the last thing? Oh, and then we're gonna talk about drama. Okay. Meter is basically the tone of the poem, where it's specific stressed / unstressed syllables that the poem is made up of. So stressed is emphasized when speaking, and unstressed is muted when speaking. So for example, in Medusa, in the first line itself, a suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy. Suspicion, doubt, and jealousy are the stressed ones. Is kind of just lost there. Common combinations is iams, I don't even know how to say it, and trachis. So iams are when you emphasize the second part of the word, and trachis or trachi, I can't even say it, is when you emphasize the first part of the word, or the first syllable. Sorry, not the first part, first syllable of the word. And they combine to form broader metrical structures, which I'm not going to talk about because I'm really bad at meters and I don't want to give you wrong information, so I'm not going to talk about this any longer. Does everyone understand poetry before we go on to drama and then quickly end? Okay, good. So, drama analysis. Certain things that you should definitely talk about if you're talking about drama. Firstly, stage directions. Stage directions can be really, really useful. They can also indicate something very important. Firstly is acting directions. So how do these instructions further characterize an individual? So things like, for example, if a character is told to stand in a particular way, stand in a particular place, stand in a particular direction relative to another character. Those things are really indicative of the interactions between the characters and indicative of their personalities around each other. Next, set directions. Set directions are also really important. Set directions are often to do with props and other set related things. How does the environment surrounding the characters reflect or contrast with their emotional state? What does the set reveal about the themes and purposes of the text? How does this impact the audience's ability to understand the text? So for example, if it's a conversation between a principal and a teacher, for example, the principal is asked to stand behind a desk. That desk is technically part of the set directions. The actor actually standing behind the desk is the acting direction. But those two together show the position of power that she's in. She's behind a desk. If she's standing behind a desk, she has even more power because she's standing relative to the other character. That's an acting direction. The fact that she's standing behind a table, the table acts as a barrier between the principal and the teacher, things like that. So acting directions and stage directions in general, provide a lot of context in terms of the tensions between characters and the relationships between characters and how they interact and how that affects the broader context and then how that affects the audience. Next, props and costumes. Like I already said, what do the props symbolize? What does a character's costume/appearance reveal about their personality? Certain props can be really, really important. So, for example, I know none of you have done this, so I can talk about this. In Doubt, one of the characters uses a ballpoint pen. Uses a fountain pen. And another character uses a ballpoint pen. And that ballpoint pen is technically a symbol of modernization, and the fountain pen is a symbol of the old times. And the fact that a specific character only prefers to use one or the other shows that that specific character is still stuck in the old times, or that specific character is moving on with the modern world, essentially. Next is proxemics. Proxemics is basically again, positioning. So this proxemics can be shown either through stage directions or just in conversation. Is one character in a greater position of power? So for example, like I said, if one character is standing over another, he has more power. How do changes in the use of space on the stage impact character relationships? So if two characters are standing really close to each other, if two characters are standing really far apart from each other, whether they're facing away from each other, facing towards each other, whether there's anything in between them, all of that is really important in terms of proxemics. Okay, that's everything with with drama. Does everyone understand? Sorry, that was a really, really quick explanation, but does that make sense? Okay, themes and notes. This is not going to be a lot of yap. I said it's going to be a lot of yap, but it's not going to be a lot of yap. So, a few things. Firstly, I would recommend for each of your works, you have a list of overarching themes. And then try to draw connections between as many of your works as possible. So like I said earlier, if you have only 2 works prepared, if you have only 2 works possible to be prepared, do those 2 really well. If you have more options, then I would recommend having at least 3 prepared, anywhere from 3 to 4. Any more than 4, you don't really need. But my preparation advice would be you list out all the themes in each of your works and try to draw connections between those works. Those connections should already be drawn in your head by the time you're reaching the exam, because those connections are not for you to make at the point of the exam. You're not going to spend minutes in your precious writing time to try to figure out how they connect. That connection should already be drawn when you're doing your note taking in your preparation. So I would say list out all the themes that are relevant, compare and contrast how different authors or graphic novelists or poets do it differently. Whether the themes are contrasting, whether there are similar conventions that they use, but they reveal different themes, reveal different meanings, things like that. About quotes, I know I said that you don't need quotes, but if you want to get quotes, I would recommend getting short quotes, but quotes that actually are fitting a lot of the themes or have quite a few literary devices in them that you can actually use. But also never be like, oh, I'm going to prepare this one quote and no matter what, I'm going to put it in my essay. If it's not relevant, do not put the quote in. It's not valuable. Until the point where, basically, unless that quote is actually providing evidence to your point, don't include it. And that's pretty much it. Okay. There were questions. I'm going to go up. I'm going to scroll. Someone said question for later. I'm going to try to find that now. If you can link it, that would be amazing. If you can't link it, I will find it. Either two. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. Is there any... Oh my god. Extended essays, I cannot give you advice for. Sorry. If you want tips for extended essays, go to the English LangLit... No, sorry. Group 1 EE and IA channel. This is for exams. Apologies. This is just exam advice, not essays advice. Sorry, extended essay advice. Is there any recommendations / advice you have to achieve a higher score on language? In terms of language, I think someone else said this as well, but transitions and flow. You need to be able to have coherence in your language. You don't want to be like, here's this, and that's it. An easy way to increase your language points is by having transitional words, by having things like, this author does this through blank. In contrast, this author does this through blank. Things like that. That would be a good language point. It improves your flow. It improves general coherence and organization, kind of. Okay. Is structure important or analysis, or is the main thing the content you are writing? I would say content is more important than structure, but if you've nailed your content already, then why mess up your structure, if that makes sense. The goal is to have the best possible analysis, but if your analysis is fairly good already, then organization is an easy way to score more marks. There you go. There was another question for later from someone else, I feel like. But also, if there's more questions, just ask them now, because that's basically it from me today. Oh, okay, this one. Found it. Okay, so is there a way to ensure that the evidence used perfectly matches with the prompt, as in ask ourselves the questions while writing the paper to ensure the evidence that we're providing directly relates to the prompt through analysis? That would be good. Also, another thing I would say is all the evidence that you want to include it in your forgot what I was going to say. Include it in your outline when you're making an outline, because you want to make sure that it's actually interlinked with your themes and your thesis. I would recommend you start off that way and then work your way. Like, the evidence, you should know what evidence to use as soon as you are ready to start writing your essay. So all the evidence I would include in your outline when you're discussing it. Is there a structure for organizing? Do you mean in terms of essay or in terms of notes? I don't know what you mean, sorry. Essay like the final P2. In terms of structure, not really. The only thing I would include is, let me go back. What is this? Where is it? Okay, yeah. Each of your quote-unquote body paragraphs, because not everyone writes body paragraphs the same way, but each of your points should have a compare point and a contrast point. Do not remove the... do not just contrast, guys. Please, 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 I'm begging you. If any of you lose points in your paper 2 because you don't compare, I will cry. Genuinely. Please, please, please compare and contrast. It's not just a contrast essay. You don't just want to talk about what's different. You want to talk about how they do something similarly. Whew. Can you do a thesis statement like through this user setting and plot the author conveys X thing? Does this work? In terms of compare and contrast means like giving one similarity and one difference. Yes, compare is similarity, difference is differences. So in my opinion, I would usually go about doing it like compare the themes and contrast the devices, but you can do it either way. A thesis statement. So that's not a bad thesis statement, although I would include more sub-themes and more than just setting. Well, setting and plot is fine. So I would go something like the authors blank and blank use setting and plot in their works to convey or to what's it called? Not convey. To show the themes of blank, blank, blank. Things like that. Like, you want to have more than just one theme that you're talking about. You want to talk about multiple sub-themes based on the keywords of your question. Ooh, I need to breathe. Anyway, questions? Will referencing the act chapter title be a plus point? For a short play like Pygmalion, it's fine. Persepolis has many chapters, it's hard to keep track. If you can, then yes, great. If you can't, you don't have to. I think a lot of people also fall into the trap of being like, in this chapter, this happens. You don't have to do that. You can just be like, the author shows this in this scene. Like, you can just describe the specific situation. You don't have to reference the exact act or the exact chapter or exact title. You can just talk about the specific thing that's happening at the point. Anyway. Questions? No questions? I'm gonna move to that. Did it hurt? What hurt? Paper 2? This is about to be a pickup line. I'm gonna cry. Yeah. Ivy mentor heaven. No, I enjoy trying to help as much as I can. So this is probably honestly the last session for me, other than we might do a practice paper 2 question. Or if you have specific things you still want me to do, just like put it in the channel so I know. Otherwise, like, cast side effects. Yeah. Otherwise, like, I don't know what else I can do of help. But yeah, thank you for coming. If you guys need to leave, feel free. If you have more questions, I'm sticking around for another like 4 minutes before karaoke. If you guys are free, come to karaoke. I know most of you are in exams and busy, but like if you want, feel free. What else was I gonna say? That's it. I'm gonna stop recording.